Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me this evening is Thomas Harper, and we're going to discuss The Mandalorian, Episode 9, The Spies. Thomas, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad you use the single digit numbering because they number it as like with the whole series, and it gets me very confused.
It's like we're on,
Like,
was it chapter 23? Like it's
yeah, yeah. And keep it. It reminds me that this show is one of the only, if not the only, new programming that came out during the pandemic, and so I'm like, that feels like 100 years ago. 23
he,
episodes.
yeah, because we've all gone through a lot. Uh,
Yeah, I've got a beard now. Look at this.
there was Twitch, quiet, loud noises. Yeah, it's like it's been a uh, rough couple years. But here we are, and we're in an era where we get Star Wars TV on a regular basis, and we get to analyze it. So first things first, what did you think of this episode? Positive, negative? How do you feel about it?
It finally felt like a payoff. Within the series, it felt like threads are finally meaningfully coming together. And I don't say that in a negative sense, like this should have happened sooner, but patience and sort of hope that certain things would bear out, or that we would get a little more explanation about things, cloning, whatever else, that those would start to pan out. And we got a lot of that. It also felt like a payoff because there felt like there was a much deeper connectivity with this episode to other aspects of the universe than maybe at any point else in this series. I mean, you've got a connection to the sequel trilogy, you've got stuff harkening back to the Clone Wars and Rebels eras, and that was really satisfying. And it was sort of a payoff. Like, if you've spent the time watching other stuff or reading other materials, it scratched those itches, and I'm hopeful that the season finale carries that on. What about you?
Similar feelings that this season has felt more episodic as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out what to do in season one, to ultimately getting to the point of, okay, you got to go find Jedi, and that's all of season two, and the payoff is we get Luke at the end.
Mm-hmm.
This has been like some seasons of Clone Wars where it's the adventure of the week that ties to a greater story, and we had a lot of adventures of the week this time around. And not that that's a bad thing, because sometimes it's nice to see a story that's just a story without like everything's on the line, because that can get exhausting. But this was just a little different, and this did feel that payoff where we're able to lean towards things from either the Clone Wars to Rebels to the sequel trilogy, with Thrawn being name dropped, which has to tie to Ahsoka in some way. So all of that was positive. I've been a little soured by all the rampant speculation that's been online that just makes me want to scream.
Who's the spy?
It's just, all right. The pirate episode was just the pirate. There was more than one pirate in that episode, and no one said boo about the singular being used instead of the plural for
Yeah,
that episode.
yeah.
This says the spies, and everyone's wigging out, or not everyone, many people are wigging out saying, well, clearly it's the armorer. Really? You think it's her? No, she could have sold them out at any point in time. We've seen her melt stormtroopers in a forge. I don't think that's the case here. The
Yeah, it it's too easy. It's too easy for folks to bite down. It's one of those where you they throw out a rabbit knowing that we'll chase it. I think it's going to be something a little more subtle and unexpected. It's probably Grogu. Grogu is probably the spy.
R5, he was the one
Yeah,
that contacted the New Republic.
that bad motivator.
Yeah, so it's just we already know he's an operative. who will.
Exactly.
So when the reinforcements need to show up, he'll be the one calling them. It's just, or yeah, it's like that stuff just drives me nuts because you don't know that. Or well, Pedro Pascal doesn't like being on the show, so they'll kill him off. I don't think so. Like that's
Yeah.
just rampant. And well, he didn't go to Celebration, so he must be leaving. He's working.
Yeah.
You drop everything and go to England. Not everyone can. So it's like, ugh. Now I might be proven wrong in 12 hours, but I don't, I don't see that happening. That seems,
Yeah.
with the amount of marketing opportunities, this isn't blowing up the Razor Crest. This would
Right.
be knocking off an important character that's making them billions. Why do that?
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense either because if the reporting is true, if there were rumors going around that Favreau was upset because he had concluded Grogu's story in his mind. He had no other plans, but was told to keep Grogu running in the story. And if there's an ounce of truth to that, which I'm not passing judgment, but you think they wouldn't apply the same sort of judgment or that same sort of position to Mando? I mean, he's probably not sold an equal amount of merchandise, but they don't bring every character to Disneyland and Disney World, but they have for both of them. So
Yeah.
I
How
don't
many
know.
versions of action figures are there of the character? He's on the dark saber box. There's the Nerf gun. Like I highly doubt. Let's bump off this character.
Yeah. Now, somebody like Bo-Katan, something like that. Like I mean, I think there's some other folks who might be fair game, um, in maybe some unexpected ways. I think Bo-Katan is maybe that's what I'm stealing myself for tomorrow is something to happen to her as her sort of story comes to some satisfying conclusion, but her you know her path ends in tragedy somehow. Like maybe a triumphant tragedy, but a tragedy. So
As,
we'll
as,
see.
as a way to unite all the tribes, that she ends up doing a sacrifice play of some kind.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, we'll get into this, but there's the unification factor that's playing out, and we have some
Mm-hmm.
historical examples that we can dig into. But let's dig in to what we have. So first things first is espionage, and I pulled up the Black Law Dictionary, the app, and this is what it says on espionage: the activity of using spies to collect information about what other government or company is doing or plans to do. With that probe droid showing up and that Imperial that's hanging out with the New Republic, that's classic espionage. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is more curiosity because the business of the probe droid in particular, um, with Elia Kane, it made me curious about the amnesty program. And so espionage is a really serious crime as is. It can be a capital offense under certain circumstances. But it makes me curious whether the New Republic has carved out special treatment for those in the amnesty program if they were to commit that sort of crime. So no doubt there's probably some, if this were a fully fleshed out world and series of laws, that's probably going to be addressed. But it would make sense if that was some sort of like aggravating factor, or that the punishment were somehow stiffer for somebody of her ilk to engage in that sort of thing.
Yeah, it would highlight the system's not working. That's a problem. That if the system is not working, that the people that you're giving amnesty for are double agents that are subverting your government. That's a problem with your system, and you should look at what you're doing. But that goes to the entire issue that is Coruscant like a state in the United States that has regressive laws that don't care about due process? Or is like Hosnian Prime really progressive and thoughtful. Like we don't know what
Hmm.
it's like on a planet by planet basis. That do people? Why is everyone so blasé? And as long as I get my, ice cream treat, I'm fine. Uh, I I I don't need anything else. So we get some classic espionage, and then we get introduced to the Shadow Council. We have the comment from season 1 that past Imperials that didn't surrender would be war criminals. Want to dig into that with this group that didn't lay down arms after the Galactic Civil War.
So there's actually a legal basis for this in canon. So in the Galactic Concordance was the document that officially ended the war post Battle of Jakku. As as part of that peace process, the New Republic realized fighting to the last man or the last Imperial was a losing venture. And so much like other conflicts in the real world, they carved out a sort of a legal construct in which a certain core group of Imperials would remain. That the Galactic Empire, maybe to some folks' surprise, remained. There was a very small cluster of folks that were demilitarized. They were kept to a very tightly bound geographic area inside the galaxy. Anyone else that was prescribing to the, or claiming to be a member of the Galactic Empire after that demarcation point was considered a war criminal, because that, now we know with hindsight, the New Republic set up this amnesty program. They also, and so they carved out sort of a forgiveness space for vast numbers of Imperials while prosecuting the worst of the worst. Like no different in some regards to something like the Nuremberg trials. You can't just feasibly prosecute everyone, and so and you mentioned before reconciliation, that sort of idea process factors in, and the existence of a shadow council is sort of the classic example of what the New Republic was trying to criminalize, to dissuade folks from continuing or having any incentive to continue waging war under the Imperial banner. And so this is one of the cool instances where there actually is sort of a reasonably fleshed out legal construct for us to look at.
Yeah, there other historical examples that come to mind were all the former Confederates that escaped to South America and had a colony down there. And again, like 90 years before, 80 years before the Germans did after World War II, that they go south and have their community, and we don't hunt them down. After World War II, you had the Japanese guys living in hills in the Philippines that refused to surrender. This would be very different. It's like an entire command. A movie example would be Atragon, which is one of the Toho monster movies where you have the Mu Empire that's kind of like an Atlantis. And there was a Japanese submarine that refused to sail. And they spent 20 years building their own nuclear submarine that could fly. Because why wouldn't you do that? How hard would it be? And I'm sure none of those guys wanted to go home. So it's like when it's a historical example, like there's a couple of them. Like you don't have like massive German towns in Buenos Aires after World War II. It's not like a thriving metropolis for the Germans, or
Right.
like the Hunters TV show. Hitler was just hanging out there on vacation until the 70s. Like that's not the world that we had. But this, yeah, it's different because it's really neglectful of the New Republic to let a problem fester. Because it's one thing if it's a guy in the mountains hanging out. That's another thing if it's, thousands of troops that are well armed and fortified and have resources to carry on with supply lines.
And this is one of those connection points, in this case, to the sequel trilogy that I was alluding to before, because the Shadow Council, this entity has existed since the reboot of New Canon. I mean, it was in the Aftermath trilogy of books for the first time, and this is the seeds of the First Order, and so you see even 35 years past Return of the Jedi in that instance, they're still not able to get their arms around it, even when confronted with proof in that case from the Resistance that there's this armed movement going on. Nobody quite wants to believe it, and you saw that in the prior episode with Carson Teva's frustration with Tim Meadows' character, and they're trying to govern now. They've transitioned out of this war-fighting Resistance role, and their plate is full of a lot of other problems. And I suspect that even if you told the New Republic that this Shadow Council existed, you might be met with some shrugs, even though it's an illegal thing. These folks are war criminals and, could be conspiring to violate the peace. There are other bigger things going on in the New Republic's estimation. Not saying that's right or wrong, but nope, neither.
And is it a big thing that you should just ignore and hope doesn't turn into a problem? That seems pretty asinine. I'm like, you get Keenan's long telegram about the Soviet Union and the threat that it posed. We paid attention to that. We had NSC 68, and we paid attention to the threat of the Soviet Union in the coming Cold War, and we stood them down and avoided a nuclear holocaust with lots of problems in between and lots of people dying across the planet between two titans. But we didn't ignore the Soviet Union. We didn't repeat the mistakes of Versailles and going we'll just ignore Germany while it rearms and go, it's not our problem. We got a treaty that says your battleships can only be so big. That's not a good thing to hide behind. And gross incompetence is not a strategy either, which is why it's just tough to watch this. And my realpolitik hawkness comes out as well, going take them out. Don't wait for them to bomb you. But I digress. Which then brings us to going to Navarro. So first, let's take IG-12. Giving a toddler an assassin droid as a walker.
Yes.
Is that child endangerment? Sure, the baby 50.
Maybe.
So let's just look at California's definition of child endangerment. Any person who, under circumstances or conditions likely to produce great bodily harm or death, willfully causes or permits any child to suffer or inflicts them thereon unjustified physical pain or mental suffering, or having the care or custody of any such child, willfully causes or permits the person or health of the child to be injured, or willfully causes or permits the child to be placed in a situation where his or her person or health is endangered, shall be punished by imprisonment in a county jail not exceeding 1 year, or in state prison for 2, 4, or 6 years. Is that well-armed walker child endangerment? And I think it depends. Is there a thermal detonator in it?
I think he's in the spot where the thermal detonator used to be.
Yeah, I don't know if it's per se child endangerment in the Star Wars world.
No, I look at this from two aspects. Whether in a vacuum, just him sitting and operating the heavy equipment is, and then where Din is taking Grogu in that heavy equipment. Does that influence where he takes him? Does Din perceive him as being somehow safer, and so he exposes him to more danger? I think the question to the latter, or the answer to the latter question, is there's no difference in how Din is treating him in the IG-12 armor versus his old just pod. He's takes him everywhere anyhow, and he doesn't want to let him out of his sight. So nothing has changed on that front, and I think our analysis from some of the other situations would stand. The IG-12 armor, they seem to be pretty confident that the Anzellans are skillful enough to have rewired this droid back to its, I think they describe it as his base motor function. So it's literally just a shell suit. It's not thinking or running any of its original programming.
Yeah, it's not like an Iron Man armor. It's more like,
There's no Jarvis.
yeah, it's more like the heavy loader from Aliens.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
comparison.
That's strong, and he can be in less risk because of the lifestyle that they have and the fact things keep wanting to kill them. So it might not, I wouldn't put a regular toddler into one of those, but in a galaxy far, far away, it might be okay.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
Yeah, it's it's kind of like a large version of just putting a kid in like a Power Wheels car.
Yeah.
And so if it's built for him, I don't know whether he's like strapped in or like what the safety mechanism is to keep him harnessed. But if it's built so he can operate it and it's reasonably safe, I don't know that it's just per se child abuse in that regard, like that it would cross that danger threshold.
Yeah, it all depends where you go. And they don't know what they're going to find on Mandalore, so
Yeah.
it's one thing to know the risk.
Yeah, but I have a feeling even without the armored chassis, he's still going to be alongside Din and that assault crew on Mandalore, one way or the other. He just happens to have a little different protection now.
And the Force.
That's true.
So he's good. He's good. Well, let's address bringing the tribes together. And just as a base matter, they land a bunch of spacecraft outside of town. Is that area zoned for landing spacecraft? Probably not, but Karga might view it as a independent exclusion zone that the Mandalorians operate, and it's big and open.
They've got all their craft sitting there. It is a good. I joked with my father-in-law does almost exclusively like land development and zoning work, and I did it for a time while I was in private practice. And if you had given me a bingo card of legal issues to predict that would come out in this season, zoning would not have been on like my 100th bingo card, but yet here we are talking about it. It's funny because you would think the business of like where in the real world would you really have an issue with aircraft landing and whatnot, but you actually see it pretty commonly. It most comes up in the context of a helicopter, since it takes less room to take off and land. But you'll get private citizens that own helicopters and they want to land and take them off from their own house, and it happens to be close in proximity to other neighbors. And so that sort of thing, that the use restriction for a property, so the question of having a helipad or a landing pad there is one question, but also whether it runs afoul of that zoning district's just general rules. Can you operate aircraft in that area? Is that something that's contemplated? So you see that a lot in the context of municipal airports too, if they're trying to decide whether to put not a large international airport, but a smaller type landing strip. That brings people out of the woodworks to comment and object to that sort of thing, for a bunch of obvious reasons.
Yeah, and it reminds me of property classes from long ago in law school, that they don't build airports near neighborhoods. They keep building neighborhoods until they get to the airport, and then they complain about the airport.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the vast majority of the complaints, with maybe some exceptions. Like the San Jose airport is downtown San Jose. I don't know the history of that one, but that one has explicit noise restrictions, that they're not launching aircraft after 10 p.m. because people like to sleep. So they don't want the roar of aircraft going on at midnight, whereas other airports, you can do that. You know, the Denver International Airport is outside of Denver. It's an hour drive to get to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to plan accordingly to get to the Denver airport if you're at an event downtown. So, but this, they just land where the Mandalorian camp is, which then raises some interesting First Amendment issues with the different tribes. And just to highlight, there's a lot to the First Amendment besides just freedom of speech. And you get respecting an establishment of, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And the other clause that's at issue here, the right of the people to peacefully assemble. You have a right to hang out with the people that you want to hang out with. So you also have the right to practice the religion that you want, with a bunch of limitations to try to avoid hitting the establishment clause. So here we have the Mandalorian sect that doesn't take off their helmets. That's pretty hardcore about their interpretation of the code. And then you get the others that have a different view of the creed, where they take their helmets off. And they view the others who keep their helmets on as primitive. And you have that difference of opinion. So how do you get everyone together to play nice and not start a shooting war? Because Lord knows there's never been a war over religion and what it means and how to follow it. Never. That's never been a problem. So the armor is the moderate, and I did not expect her to be that in season 1 and her interpretation of the creed and telling Din that he was a Mandalorian no more for removing his helmet. She seemed to be the extreme version of what the creed is. She became the moderate that wants to bring everyone together, the reformer. So she's more like a Pope Francis than a Pope Benedict, and that's just weird. I did not expect that. And
she's trying to get them all in one place to be wiped out by the Empire.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case because there's strength in numbers. Now let's go retake the planet. That doesn't sound like I'm setting everyone up for the fall. It's I've brought everyone together. Everyone needs to walk the way together. That's very different than what we've seen from the prior 2 seasons. It's why I think the armor is now a dynamic character, short of something extreme happening in the final episode. But she called for a feast, which again is kind of the religious food brings people together. I don't know what big bird they killed. I don't know if it was one of the foundling, but there was a big turkey on the rotisserie that had to be a weird eating arrangement because you have all these other Mandos that go off by themselves to eat. So again, just a little weird on how they do that. You then get the coming together with Axe and Paz. So we see them not like each other. When they're in the drop ship, you have Paz mention the damage is worse than I thought. And then you have Axe say, I was here when it happened, when they exchange looks at each other. They have their fight on the sailing barge that Grogu stops. When the barge is about to capsize, it's Paz and Axe that grab Grogu and fly him to safety.
Mm-hmm.
It's when they're pinned down, it's Axe going, I will call for help, which means he's going to do a high altitude flight with his jetpack through the storm layer to get to an altitude where he can send a message. Sounds like a sacrifice play. You then have Paz's last stand, which was glorious. And through that common enemy and the sacrifices that they're making, it reminds me of from the American Civil War, how African American uh, companies, troops were treated with discrimination.
Hmm.
They were never like sold short on supplies, like they were well fed and well armed. They had the unequal pay issue that was eventually corrected after Fort Wagner. But there were two of battles in battles in the Civil War that resulted in the white troops ignoring the fact that the black troops were black and that the only thing they saw was an assault on the uniform. And that was Fort Wagner, which was the Massachusetts 54th, depicted in the film Glory, where they lost over half their men trying to storm that fight. And in the lead up to it, they had horrible lithographs in the New York Herald that depicted African American soldiers as two welding monkeys. It was just disgusting. After that battle, all the lithographs were like of this heroic battle, and like public opinion did a 180, and again showing that we're in this together. Fort Pillow was Confederates just executing black soldiers, and white soldiers reacted very negatively to that because they saw it just as soldiers getting executed after they had surrendered. And there are instances of war crimes that took place by Union guys who beat the hell out of Confederate POWs, saying, "Remember Fort Pillow," and then wailing on guys.
Mm-hmm.
Bad, but the difference by skin color disappeared in those instances. Now, we didn't solve racism. We have many problems still, but it was just that instance of common threat, commonality brought people together. Something similar might be happening with the two Mandalorian tribes and fighting the Imperials that they have. I don't know how that's going to play out, if Heavy's going to become the martyr for them, if Axe survives with making the call for help. I don't know. We'll find out when the episode drops, but I think that could be a way to bring them all together, is through common cause. And that's that they want their homeworld back. Thoughts?
Yeah, I
You're
mean,
the soldier.
the beauty of all of this, and this is another big sort of pillar of my comment earlier, is that the entirety of what we've seen from the Mandalorian culture on screen up to this point in Rebels and Clone Wars has been near complete fracture. I mean, the closest to any kind of unity you saw was in sort of the early part of the Clone Wars, where you had the new Mandalorian society under Satine Kryze, Bo-Katan's sister. And even still, you had violent rifts that ultimately helped tear things apart with Death Watch and um, Imperial loyalists, or I guess in that context, separatist loyalists. And so their entire history, their entire society has been defined by this division. It would be really poignant. I don't know that it's going to happen tomorrow, but it would be really poignant to at least see a major chess piece move in the direction of unification. That the fighting might not stop, but at least they're fighting a common enemy as opposed to each other once and for all. And there was a comment about Din's tribe being on Concordia, and Concordia was where Death Watch had its main base of operations before they got driven off that moon. And uh, yeah, so I think that would be the most significant thread that could come together. And if Bo-Katan is the one that can do the weaving, that would be phenomenal. And I think about the comment that Din makes, that your song's not yet written. That may be her song, sort of her final opus, uh, before whether no matter what her future holds. and that would be really, I think, one of the most meaningful things we've seen from this show.
That and if she honors her sister, you know,
Yes.
you know,
Oh
and
man.
following like, okay,
Oof.
my sister was right,
Hmm.
which would be interesting to see, or at least perform. But again, in our, again, beauty of our First Amendment is, well, you see different churches, different places of worship that have different beliefs, and they can all be neighbors or close to each other, and they're not throwing rocks at each other. So if you get Mandos who take off their helmet and Mandos that don't take off their helmet, they can all learn to live together, and that would
Exactly.
be good. Well, let's get to the war crimey area that, so we learn from Bo that she did surrender after at least partial bombing of the planet.
Hmm.
We're not sure, it's not clear how badly they were hit, but they were apparently hit bad, and she had to surrender. Gideon then kept bombing anyway. Can you elaborate on the legality of bombing an entire planet after it's surrendered?
A couple thoughts kind of collide here. The business of ceasefires or um, suing for peace, that there's not a lot that IHL has to say about the enforceability of those agreements. However, the core act of bombing indiscriminately Mandalore in order to bring it to its knees, outright a crime against humanity. I mean, there's no you have to have distinction in terms of your um, uh, choice of targeting between a legitimate lawful military target and a non-legitimate or unlawful target, that being civilians, and just treating Mandalorians all as one living, breathing entity just doesn't cut it. That and there are a multitude of other considerations that go into it. But the bottom line is that was like, it was a war crime to begin with, a grave breach of in our world, the Geneva Conventions. In their world, certainly, I think there's been reference to the Alderaan Conventions, which sound heck of a lot like Geneva in our world. But in any event, that it was a war crime to begin with, and it was a war crime when it resumed. You're at some point, you're just talking about scale of things. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is the business of stopping and then starting fighting. You enter the realm of like a version of perfidy in this instance, because you've caused a number of combatants to surrender, to lay down their arms, believing that they have protected status. So you've used in a treacherous way that instrument of surrender in order to gain a military advantage. That would be usually, a lot of times within Star Wars, we talk about this the opposite way. Like usually it's Anakin surrendering and then immediately pulling out his lightsaber and killing people or slashing droids. But this is no different, different flavor to it. But the whole business of perfidy is taking advantage of some sort of protected status and basically luring your enemy into a some false sense on account of that, in order to get a military advantage, to use that offensively to your benefit. And that's exactly what happened, it sounds like, in that case. Gideon agrees to this ceasefire and then immediately starts slaughtering the people who lay down their arms.
As a separate and distinct war crime, you get genocide, and
Mm-hmm.
that this the Purge of Mandalore, the Night of Thousand Tears, sounded like genocide out of the gate. He paused to accept a surrender and then kept bombing. So, charge, I would put one, genocide, because how many Mandos are left at this point in time? And the answer is not many. that they're reduced to just a handful. So I'd call this attempted genocide.
And he doubles down on it in his planning with the Shadow Council because he requisitions more TIE interceptors and bombers, not to increase his own fleet, but because he thinks, uh, based on the intel from the beginning of the episode, that Mandalorians are sort of reestablishing themselves. That this threat he thought he had extinguished largely was it. And keep in mind, genocide doesn't, like, the whether it's a crime doesn't hinge on success. It's really a crime of intent. You can commit genocide and be really bad at it and not accomplish any of your goals. You can commit genocide on the scale of what the Nazis perpetrated during World War II. The important part is what your intent and aim is, and very clearly here, Gideon's aim is to extinguish the Mandalorian people.
It reminds me of the 1996 presidential election, where you had Republicans in the primary arguing about Kosovo. And some were like, it's fine. And it was Alan Keyes took the position, like he really, they didn't complete genocide because there's still some left. Therefore, he didn't commit genocide. It's like, it was still the systematic
Yeah,
eradication of people based upon their ethnicity. That's genocide. And again, we've seen American politicians argue how many is enough for it to be
right.
genocide. And Gideon clearly attempted it. So the charge would be there because he tried to kill them all. And now he wants to finish the job.
Exactly.
Now, this also goes to the issue why I don't think the armor is the spy, because Gideon's shocked that the different tribes are working together. So if that was some grand plan, he didn't know about it.
I only thought you could have a situation. I don't want to go too deep into the fire swamp here, but where she was in collaboration of some sort out of a desire to keep her covert alive, and hey, I'll pass you information of some type as long as we're allowed to do our thing. I don't know that that makes a whole lot of sense given what we've seen so far on Navarro, but and then she had a change of heart.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, I still don't think so. I mean, again, that would put her in like the French collaborator category, as opposed to, I don't think she's Vichy French.
Vichy Mandalorians.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, just, no, that's not what we got here. It's in the Book of Boba Fett, when Din had cut himself with the dark saber, one of her first comments was to treat his wounds. On the sail barge, seeing the irradiated, sick Mandalorian survivors, where these none of them can stay here. Like they're shot. Let's take them up to be treated. That seems consistent with her character of wanting to make sure that the injured aren't left to die, which again, first episode, when the turtle alligator came out of the water, she protected the kid. So
Yeah.
I just don't think so. Now I'm going to be very upset if I'm wrong. Now, here's an idea or question for you. Bo-Katan was head of state. The survivors that she finds, is like still swear allegiance to her and apologize for failing her. What obligations, if any, does she have to the survivors as the former head of state?
As a former head of state, I don't know. I don't know that she has any at this point in time. I don't know what the law would impose upon her residually. Um, as far as the Mandalorian culture's influence on her obligations. I think she clearly carries with her at least a moral obligation rooted in culture to fight and try to either take back the planet, accomplish her goal, or die trying. I know she strayed from that path, but and renewed her commitment to it this season. Um, yeah, what's your thought on that?
Well, if she might be the head of state again because she has the dark saber.
Mm-hmm.
And if she's reclaimed the title, it goes from a moral obligation to what's best for my people, which would imply that there's a constitution of some kind that the Mandalorians have. And we don't know. We don't know if there's a written one or an unwritten one, or if the creed defies what the Mandalore is supposed to do. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But one would think that if people are following you, you need to look out for them. It's like we want our president or governors to be looking out for the best interest of citizens and anyone that lives in the United States. We don't want harm coming to anyone. And if someone's in trouble, we want to figure out how can we help others who need help. There are different ways to do that. But if you've been bombed to glass and you find survivors, that could put them into a refugee type category that I think there's definitely a moral reason to do it. I think not doing it would completely erode your leadership authority because, if you get the reputation, she will leave you to die. No one follows the person like that. People follow, he came back for me. He saved me. Like, we don't leave people behind. And I think that's the attitude that she should have in order to have a survivable government if she's able to form one.
I agree with you.
Well, any other issues that jump out at you from this episode?
No, I do think the existence, um, there's a question about Mandalore's status. I mean, I think it's an unaffiliated world, but it's clear that the Empire has set up shop there. Gideon has a base, tie hanger at the very least. They're also actively harvesting resources from the planet, and so there's a question, at least a general one, whether he has any claim to ownership over that space, and not just for the facility, but any legal claim to the Beskar itself.
What are Moff Gideon's mineral rights to Mandalore? Wow. Yeah, that's messed up.
Any right. Keep in mind, any rights he would have gained, like I say, rights with heavy air quotes around it. Those are gained on the back of genocide.
Yeah, it's like, well, the planet's abandoned. It's like it's abandoned because you killed billions.
Right.
That that's a big caveat.
Yeah. So I'll bring this aspect. I won't throw us all the way down the rabbit hole, but let's go back, and we don't know the Empire's history on Mandalore fully, but let's assume that we'll make the reasonable assumption they were an occupying power. At some point, they brought troops in. Clearly, Gideon was operating in his ISB capacity. An occupying power will always, under the law, owe a certain set of legal duties, and a lot of that looks like establishment or reestablishment of not the status quo, but a system or a set of operations that resemble normal order. So law and order has to be reestablished. Laws have to be abided by. But when you talk about resources, there are restrictions there. They can't just an occupying power can't just come in and carte blanche take everything. There is a connectivity to military necessity. So if there are if there's a necessity for certain resources to be harvested, then that's a pretty big loophole. So take Ukraine and an occupied area that might have a bunch of grain that could be harvested and used to feed troops, occupying troops in that area. That'd be an instance where that harvesting would probably be okay. If you're there just burning all the fields just so nobody can have any grain and people starve and it breaks things, very different story. And we don't know fully how the empire was using it. We've seen a little bit like it's being used as currency. It's clearly been melted down into ingots and they're trading it. I think that falls on the wrong side of the law. But the business of creating armor, like military equipment with it, I think there's an argument that, assuming the other duties of an occupying power are being followed, that that's not unlawful. Doesn't excuse the genocide, doesn't set that aside, but the law doesn't really concern itself with how the occupation was started. That set of duties flows from whether an occupation exists. So those questions operate sort of independent or like in tandem with other considerations.
It would explain how the Imperial Remnant can pay its troops.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to stick around out of loyalty.
No. Maybe the Praetorians, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the fanatics. But like the guys that we saw in season 2 at that fuel depot, they seem like regular troopers. They didn't seem like the hardcore believers that were the zealots who were here, like the SS officers.
Right.
It's a different category of soldier that these guys need to get paid. And after the Civil War, maybe they're happy having a place to stay and sleep and purpose and everything that they've been indoctrinated to believe, but you still need to pay them. And they still need to be able to buy crackers and all the other stuff that's going to take resources. So they're
travel biscuits.
Yeah, there has to be funding. So maybe this is their funding mechanism, or at least one of them. Because we saw in Andor, they had payroll. So they got to pay these guys. But be that as it may, that's the one issue that could get us a no prize of how they're able to retain their troops, because they do pay them in Beskar or use the Beskar to get currency of some other kind that they can trade for goods and services. Maybe a pension plan for later. Because again, you got to pay soldiers.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, as a soldier who gets paid, yes, this is true.
Yeah, they're not going to stick around otherwise. So with that, again, I highly enjoyed this episode. I don't know what we're going to see in the last episode. I would hope, X-Wings and Y-Wings come in and we have a nice space battle with TIE interceptors, because again, who doesn't love that?
Agreed.
And again, if you're going to pick a fight, picking it with a bunch of Mandalorians doesn't seem like a good life choice. So
you better, at the very least, you better bring more than bombers and interceptors.
Yeah, overwhelming force. So
I was half expecting when the armor broke through the clouds and the atmosphere in the gauntlet to see some semblance of an Imperial fleet like ripping apart the Mandalorian fleet, but I guess there's still time for it.
Yeah. And was R5 on board with her?
I can't recall. That's a good question, but I don't remember.
Because again, there's your ticket to calling for backup.
Yeah.
If there's an attack, when there's an attack. So, but again, they surprised us with the appearance of Luke Skywalker.
This is true.
So they've done a good job of a nice big ending each season. So let's see what goodies are waiting for us after episode 10. So again, we live in a world where we get Star Wars on TV. We'll get Ahsoka in August, barring something else. Did you pay attention to when Skeleton Crew's coming out?
I don't think they set an exact release date. I think they had originally vaguely set one toward the end of the year, but obviously that's not in play right now. So I don't know if it's going to be a 2023 thing. If anything, it would probably be a November December release, depending on Ahsoka's length.
Yeah, kind of similar to what they did with Book of Boba Fett. It started,
Yeah,
end of the year and then went through January into February. So
yeah,
something I could see that happening.
yeah.
So
That would make sense. And it sounds like Andor is reasonably on track to deliver a second season next year, so that would time out, right?
and there were plenty of teases about another season of Kenobi without saying they were doing another
This
season
is
of Kenobi.
true.
So we get from a certain point of view, there might be another season of Kenobi in our future. We don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe. I would hope so. Be nice. So I'm down with a Tatooine adventure with Kenobi. That would make me happy. Give McGregor more gray hair.
It's true.
So with that, everyone, thanks for tuning in for us as we've talked about the Mandalorians this season. We have more coming up, and hope you join us for that. Wherever you listen to us, please leave a review. It helps others find the show, share the show, tell your friends about the show. All of that is helpful to us. And wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.